They say family is where you first learn love, but for some of us, it's where we first learn control. The dinner table glowed with chandelier light, silver forks aligned like soldiers. Amanda sat quietly, her smile thin as glass, while her mother's laughter sliced through the air. "A useless job, Amanda? Really?" she said, each word sharpened to humiliate. Around her, the family chuckled, unaware, or maybe unwilling, to see the cruelty buried beneath the joke. That's how control works, disguised as care, delivered through tradition. It sounds like love, but it feels like debt. Every glance, every smirk, was a small reminder of hierarchy, one that had been rehearsed for years. Amanda didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because rebellion doesn't always start with shouting. Sometimes it starts in silence. Her eyes moved from her mother's pearls to the trembling candlelight, and something inside her shifted. The truth she'd kept hidden was ready to surface. "I've been paying your bill. LS for 2 years, she said quietly, her voice steady and calm. The laughter stopped. Forks froze midair. The same family that mocked her now sat speechless, their authority crumbling under the weight of her words. In that moment, power changed hands, not with anger but with truth. The silence after Amanda's words was heavier than anger. Her mother's lips parted but nothing came out. For the first time, control had slipped from her hands. Guilt, the very weapon she'd mastered, now turned inward. You could almost see the confusion flicker in her eyes. She had built her power on stories. "I sacrificed everything for this family. You owe me your conversation back to control." "We didn't ask you to do that," she said, her tone brittle. But Amanda didn't look away this time. "You didn't have to," she answered softly. "I saw the foreclosure notice." Those words hit harder than any shout could. They weren't meant to hurt, they were meant to free. Around that table, generations of manipulation began to unravel, because guilt loses its power when truth enters the room. What her family didn't understand yet was that Amanda's quiet rebellion wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming the story of who she was. Amanda had always mistaken sacrifice for affection. Her mother's long sighs, her father's "we worked so hard for you," her sister's smug nods, they all sounded like love until she realized they were just receipts disguised as emotions. Every favor in that house came with fine print. "We fed you, we clothed you, we gave you everything." But what they never said aloud was the rest of the sentence: "so you'll never outgrow us." That's the hidden rule of certain families. They don't raise you to be free, they raise you to remain loyal. The moment Amanda earned her own money, the system shook. Her independence was their insult. Because in homes built on guilt, success feels like betrayal. That night, as her mother's eyes darted across the table, between shame, fear, and pride, Amanda saw the truth. Love that demands proof isn't love at all. It's control. And for the first time, she didn't try to defend herself. She didn't explain where the $61K came from or how many sleepless nights she spent to keep the house afloat. She just let the silence stretch, because silence, when owned, becomes power. Her family couldn't handle it. The woman they once mocked for being weak now held the strength they never understood, the power to walk away from validation. In the days after that dinner, Amanda didn't argue. She didn't return her mother's calls right away, and she didn't explain herself to anyone. That was new. For years, she had carried conversations like burdens, replaying every accusation, every guilt-laced "thank you," trying to fix what she never broke. But now her silence became armor. She learned that not every story deserves a reply. Her revenge wasn't loud, it was in the calmness that followed. The family that once fed on her reactions now starved in her quiet. It wasn't cruelty, it was correction. Because sometimes the only way to heal is to stop performing for people who only applaud when you're small. Amanda began to rebuild her life piece by piece, not to prove anything, but to feel peace. She moved through her days without announcing her progress, letting her growth happen where no one could twist it into guilt. She realized something powerful. Freedom doesn't come when the world finally respects you. It comes when their disrespect no longer controls you. Her family still lived in the same house she saved, the same walls that now whispered her name differently. Not as a allure, but as the one who left their system intact, yet escaped its spell. Weeks passed before Amanda saw her mother again. The house looked smaller now, not because it had changed, but because she had. The same walls that once echoed with judgment now felt hollow, stripped of their authority. Her mother opened the door with a forced smile, rehearsed and trembling. "You could have told us," she said, voice caught between pride and resentment. Amanda studied her for a long second. The woman who once controlled every heartbeat of her life now seemed human. Fragile. The power imbalance had reversed, not through revenge but through realization. "I didn't want thanks," Amanda said softly. "I just wanted peace." The words landed like glass, gentle but unbreakable. For the first time, her mother didn't argue. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she finally understood that control isn't love, and silence isn't failure. Amanda didn't stay long. She didn't need to. Closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it arrives in the calm understanding that you've already won. As she stepped outside, the evening air felt different. Lighter, cleaner. The house she once saved now stood behind her, heavy with all the things she refused to carry anymore. She didn't look back, because real revenge isn't about proving your worth. It's about remembering you never needed their permission to have it. As Amanda drove away, the night sky felt different. No longer a roof above her past, but a canvas for her future. For the first time in years, her mind was quiet. No imaginary arguments, no need to justify her choices. She realized that healing doesn't always roar like victory. Sometimes it whispers like freedom. The $61,000 she spent had once felt like a loss, but now she saw it differently. It wasn't payment, it was punctuation. A full stop at the end of a long sentence she didn't write but finally finished. What she bought with that money wasn't their comfort. It was her clarity. She began to understand what few ever do, that some people will only love you as long as you need them. The moment you stop needing, their affection collapses because it was never love, it was leverage. Amanda wasn't bitter anymore. She was awake. Every guilt trip, every cutting remark, every dismissal, it all made sense now. They weren't proof of her weakness, they were symptoms of their fear. And the greatest revenge against fear isn't confrontation, it's evolution. She didn't want them to change anymore, she just wanted to keep walking, forward, free, and unashamed. Amanda never planned to become a guide for anyone. She wasn't a speaker, a writer, or a symbol. But when people around her started sharing their own stories of invisible control, mothers who used guilt as currency, fathers who measured love in obedience, she recognized the pattern instantly. Pain speaks a language only survivors understand. Over coffee and quiet conversations, she began telling her story, not with anger, but with calm truth. "It doesn't make you ungrateful to protect your peace," she'd say. "It makes you honest." Her words spread quietly like light under a door. She didn't preach revenge, she taught reclamation, the art of taking back what guilt once owned. Soon, Amanda realized that the real legacy of her story wasn't the $61,000 or the confrontation. It was the reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just refuses to bend. People began to see her not as the girl who defied her mother, but as the woman who ended a cycle. In freeing herself, she'd cracked open a truth that had trapped generations. You don't owe your peace to the people who broke it. Every time she shared that truth, another invisible chain somewhere loosened. And that, Amanda knew, was the kind of revenge that lasts, the kind that heals. Forgiveness didn't come easy for Amanda. For a long time, the very word made her stomach twist. People told her it was the mature thing to do, as if absolving someone else was the final stage of healing. But Amanda learned something different. True forgiveness isn't a gift you hand to the one who hurt you. It's the key you use to unlock your own cage. It doesn't erase what happened. It just stops it from running your life. She didn't forgive to make her mother feel better. She forgave because she was tired of carrying pain like proof of her strength. She didn't need to keep bleeding to remember the lesson. The scar was enough. One morning, Amanda passed by the house again. The curtains were drawn, the garden still trimmed, life going on as if nothing had happened. She felt nothing, no anger, no ache, no pride, just stillness. And that's when she knew she was free. Forgiveness hadn't changed the past, it had released her from it. She whispered, "I hope you find peace, not for them, but for herself." Because peace, she realized, is the most elegant form of revenge. It's walking away so healed that even your silence sounds like victory. Amanda often thought about how easily history repeats itself, not just in nations or empires, but in living rooms. Every generation passes down what it refuses to confront. Her grandmother had once been silenced by duty, her mother ruled by image, and she herself had been shaped by guilt. It wasn't evil, it was inheritance, the kind no one writes into wills, but everyone receives. But someone always has to decide, the cycle ends here. And Amanda did. She didn't do it with speeches or rebellion, she did it with boundaries, with quiet no's that echoed louder than arguments. That's how patterns break. Not with noise, but with choice. Now, when she looked at her reflection, she didn't see defiance. She saw lineage evolving. She saw a woman who had learned that love without control still exists, but you have to build it yourself. She knew her children, if she ever had them, would never inherit her silence. They'd grow up knowing love is safety, not debt. That was her real legacy, not the money she spent or the confrontation she survived, but the future she rewrote. And somewhere, deep down, she understood the greatest revenge is not proving the past wrong, it's refusing to repeat it. Years later, Amanda could still remember that dinner, the laughter, the sting, the silence that followed. But it no longer haunted her. It played in her memory like an old film she'd already seen too many times, familiar but powerless. She had changed in ways that couldn't be measured by money or approval. The 61K, the humiliation, the years of doubt, all of it had become part of her architecture. The pain had shaped her, but it didn't define her. What once felt like a wound had turned into wisdom, proof that you can rebuild yourself even after love tries to own you. Standing by her window one evening, watching the city lights flicker below, she realized something simple and profound. Some stories don't end with applause or reconciliation. They end quietly, with peace, with distance, with a heart that no longer trembles when the past knocks. Amanda smiled. She didn't need revenge anymore, she'd outgrown it. Her silence had become her victory, her calm the final answer. And as the night deepened around her, she whispered the truth she had earned. They called me a failure once, but peace was the only success I ever needed. Time moved forward, and so did Amanda, but in a gentler rhythm now. She no longer chased closure or validation, she lived in clarity. Every person she met became a mirror, reflecting pieces of her old self. The caretaker, the pleaser, the girl who thought love was something to earn. But she no longer recognized that version. Instead, she carried herself like someone who had finally learned the quiet art of balance. Giving without emptying, helping without disappearing. Freedom had rewritten her instincts. She didn't react from guilt anymore, she responded from grace. And that shift, invisible to most, was everything. Sometimes. Late at night, Amanda would think about how many people were still sitting at their own dinner tables, swallowing shame disguised as love. And she'd wish she could tell them what she now knew. That peace doesn't mean walking away from your family. It means walking back to yourself. Every boundary, every truth spoken softly into fear, is a small act of evolution. She was living proof that even in the ruins of control, something beautiful can grow, something that looks a lot like freedom and sounds exactly like your own name said with love. One rainy evening, Amanda sat at her desk with a single lamp casting a warm circle of light over the blank page. For years, she had carried her story in silence, afraid that speaking it would somehow make her small again. But now she understood something deeper. Silence isn't strength when it hides the truth. It's strength when it waits for the right moment to speak. She began to write. Not to accuse, not to expose, but to release. Every word he typed was a fragment of her freedom, stitched together into meaning. Her story was no longer about revenge. It was about recognition, for everyone who had ever been told they were ungrateful for wanting peace. As the rain tapped softly against the window, Amanda felt lighter with every line. She didn't know if anyone would read it, and she didn't care. The act of writing was the closure she never got from others, a conversation with her past that no one else needed to hear. She titled the story simply, The Price of Peace. And as she saved the document, she smiled, because now her voice existed somewhere outside her pain. It wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a message, a quiet reminder to the world that sometimes, survival itself is the story worth telling. Weeks after posting her story online, Amanda forgot about it. She didn't check the views, didn't expect replies. But slowly, messages began to appear. Quiet confessions from strangers who had lived the same script in different homes. Your story is mine, one woman wrote. I thought I was the only one who felt guilty for choosing peace. Others shared their own turning points. The nights they finally said no, the days they stopped apologizing for breathing freely. Amanda read every word with tears and stillness. Her pain had become language, and language had become liberation. She had built a bridge made of honesty, one strong enough for others to cross. The story began to spread, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. In a world full of noise, Amanda's calm honesty felt like a mirror people didn't know they needed. Her name didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the awakening it carried. Some called it courage, others called it healing. Amanda just called it finally breathing. What she had once endured in isolation had now become a movement of quiet resilience, a reminder whispered across screens and cities. You don't owe your peace to anyone who uses love as a weapon. And in the shared truth, Amanda's revenge finally became what it was always meant to be: redemption. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Amanda was at a small cafe, lost in her thoughts, when a young woman approached her, nervous, hesitant. "Are you the one who wrote The Price of Peace?" she asked softly. Amanda froze for a moment, surprised. The woman's voice trembled as she continued. "Your story. It helped me leave a house where I wasn't allowed to speak." For a second, neither of them said anything. The cafe noise faded, the world went still. Amanda realized she was looking at someone she'd never met, yet somehow they had already healed each other. Her story had become a thread connecting broken places, not through drama, but through truth. After that day, Amanda stopped questioning the purpose of her pain. She understood now. Every tear, every silence, every betrayal, it had all been a lesson written in invisible ink, waiting to reveal itself when she was ready. Her suffering had been alchemy, transforming hurt into light for others to follow. And as she walked home that evening, sunlight cutting through the clouds, she smiled, not the forced smile of endurance, but the easy one that comes when your past no longer defines you. She had begun as the girl mocked at dinner, but she had become something far greater, a voice that turns survival into a map for freedom. Amanda never set out to leave a legacy, she just wanted peace. But peace, once spoken into the world, takes on a life of its own. Months later, her story appeared in places she'd never imagined, quoted in articles about emotional healing, shared in support groups, whispered in conversations between mothers and daughters finally learning to understand each other. People weren't repeating her pain, they were reclaiming their own. Her words had become seeds, scattering across hearts she'd never meet, and that realization humbled her more than any apology ever could. She hadn't just told her story, she had given permission for others to tell theirs. One night, scrolling through her messages, she came across one that stopped her cold. It read, "Your story didn't just save me, it helped me forgive myself." Amanda stared at the words for a long time, her throat tightening. That was it, the quiet, invisible reward the world rarely shows. Not fame, not recognition, but resonance. She realized her journey had come full circle. She had once fought for peace inside a single home, and now that peace was echoing in thousands. Her legacy wasn't about what she endured, it was about what she released, and in that release, she had finally become free. Amanda sat by the window that overlooked Seattle's quiet skyline, the rain tracing gentle lines down the glass like the world itself was remembering. Her journal lay open on the table, the same one that once held receipts and rage, now filled with reflections and calm. Tonight, she wasn't writing to her mother, her father, or even Sierra. She was writing to anyone who had ever been made to feel small for giving too much. Her pen moved slowly, deliberately. They will call you selfish when you stop saving them. They will call you cold when you stop burning yourself to keep them warm. But that is not cruelty, that is reclamation. The words flowed like confession and command all at once. She paused, breathing deeply, then continued. The world will try to convince you that your worth is measured by what you give away, but freedom begins the moment you decide your energy is sacred. Love doesn't demand your sacrifice. Manipulation does. When they say you've changed, smile. It means you've finally stopped living in their cage. By the time she set the pen down, the rain had stopped. The air smelled of earth and electricity, the scent of something washed clean. Amanda looked at the ink drying on the page and whispered to herself, "This isn't a goodbye, it's a beginning." For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a daughter proving her worth. She felt like a woman defining it. The knock came on a Sunday morning, soft, hesitant, yet heavy with history. Amanda froze mid-step, her coffee mug trembling slightly in her hand. Through the peephole, she saw Sierra standing in the hallway, a suitcase beside her and eyes that carried sleepless nights. Amanda opened the door slowly, unsure whether to brace for another demand or a genuine reunion. But Sierra's first words caught her off guard. "I came to say thank you, and I'm sorry." Her voice cracked, stripped of its old confidence. the kind that used to come from being the favored one. Amanda gestured her inside, the silence between them thick but not hostile, like two worlds cautiously learning to orbit each other again. As they sat by the window, Sierra began to talk. Not the rehearsed kind of talking, but the raw, unraveling kind that costs you something. She confessed how she'd discovered the truth, how their parents had continued to blame Amanda for abandoning the family while still living off the savings she'd left behind. Sierra's face flushed with shame. "I let them use me," she whispered. "I thought being loved meant being chosen, but it was just being used in a prettier way." Amanda listened quietly, every word a shard of glass and a stitch of healing at once. When Sierra reached for her hand, Amanda didn't pull away. "We were both raised to believe love meant obedience," Amanda said softly. "Now we get to learn what love really means." And for the first time in years, they sat together not as competitor and caretaker, but as equals, staring at the same horizon. It took Amanda weeks to agree to it, to walk back into that house that once echoed with judgment and cold silence. But closure doesn't arrive uninvited. Sometimes you have to step into the ruins to collect it. The day they drove up the familiar gravel path, Sierra's hands shook on the steering wheel. The house looked smaller now, its white paint chipped, the once perfect garden left wild. Amanda could almost hear the echoes, her mother's sharp voice, her father's disappointed sighs, the faint hum of the clock that marked every uncomfortable dinner. When Sierra unlocked the door, the smell of old furniture and forgotten perfume filled the air. Time hadn't been kind to this place, but it had been honest. As they moved through the rooms, it felt like walking through the ghosts of who they used to be. In the corner of their mother's study, Amanda noticed a faded envelope wedged behind a drawer. Her name was written on it, not Mandy, the nickname her parents used when they wanted to soften an insult, but Amanda. Inside was a letter, trembling in ink and emotion. Their mother had written it months after Amanda left. "You were right, we used you because you made easy to feel safe. I didn't know how to love without control." There was no apology, not really, but there was awareness. And that, Amanda realized, was enough. She folded the L, ate her carefully, and looked at Sierra. "We can go now," she said with a small smile. As they stepped outside, the sun cut through the clouds, lighting up the old house like a confession finally spoken. That evening, Amanda and Sierra drove to the edge of a quiet lake, the same one their parents used to take them to for picnics that always ended in arguments. The sky was bruised with twilight, streaks of pink dissolving into deep blue. Amanda stood by the water, holding the letter between her fingers. It felt lighter than she expected, as if the paper itself understood that its purpose was finally complete. Sierra watched silently as Amanda struck a match. The flame caught quickly, curling the edges of the paper into gold. For a moment the letter glowed, a final flicker of the past trying to stay alive. And then it turned to ash, carried off by the evening wind. Amanda didn't cry. She just breathed, deep, steady, unbroken. For the first time, her body didn't hold tension like armor. It felt open, like a vessel emptied of guilt. "You're really letting it go," Sierra whispered. Amanda nodded, eyes still on the fading smoke. "All of it, the blame, the begging, the pretending." They stood in silence, the wind tugging gently at their hair, the lake reflecting the last light of day. What had once been a story about pain had transformed into one about peace, a kind of quiet power that doesn't demand to be seen. As they walked back to the car, Amanda looked over her shoulder one last time and smiled. "It's strange," she said softly. "You think freedom is something you have to fight for, but sometimes it's what's left after you stop fighting." Months later, Amanda found herself standing in a small community hall, sunlight spilling through the windows, illuminating rows of women seated before her. Some looked broken, some angry, and some simply tired. Faces that mirrored the one she once saw in her own reflection. Behind her, a modest banner read, "The House I Built. A foundation for women reclaiming their worth." It had started as a simple idea, a support network for those who had been emotionally, financially, or spiritually drained by their families. But as stories poured in from across the country, Amanda realized this wasn't just a project, it was a movement. A place where women learned that survival wasn't shame, it was strength in disguise. When she stepped onto the stage, Amanda didn't use notes. She spoke from the quiet, steady place that pain had carved open. "We were taught to fix everyone but ourselves," she said, her voice trembling yet certain. "But you cannot pour from an empty soul. You can love your family and still choose yourself. You can forgive and still walk away." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full. full of women realizing they weren't alone. Afterward, one of them approached Amanda, clutching her hand. "You gave me hope," she whispered. Amanda smiled, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, peace that didn't come from saving others, but from helping them save themselves. One crisp autumn morning, Amanda found an envelope in her mailbox. Thick paper, her name written in the familiar, careful handwriting of a man who never spoke enough. Her father. For a long while she just stood there on the porch, the chill wind brushing against her hands. The envelope felt heavier than its weight, pulsing with every unspoken word of their shared history. Inside, she imagined all the possibilities: an apology, a justification, or perhaps nothing but silence dressed as closure. Sierra, standing beside her, asked softly, "Are you going to open it?" Amanda smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the letter. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe not." She turned the envelope over in her hands, then placed it on the small wooden table by her front door, the one she used to stack bills and reminders. It sat there quietly, like a ghost waiting for acknowledgement. But Amanda no longer needed to dig through pain to prove she'd healed. "I don't need to know if he's sorry," she whispered. "Some answers stop mattering when you stop needing permission to move on." The sunlight streamed through the window, landing directly on the letter's edge, and in that golden glow it looked less like a message and more like a mirror, reflecting a woman who had already written her own ending. She walked away, barefoot on the warm floor, her steps light, her heart unburdened. For the first time in her life, Amanda didn't chase closure. She chose it. The cemetery was quiet, the kind of silence that hums, a low, endless sound that lives between the wind and memory. Amanda stood by the gravestone, tracing the carved name of her mother with her fingertips. The marble was cold, smooth, and indifferent, much like the woman it represented. For years, Amanda had imagined this moment as one of anger or release, but now there was neither, only a deep, steady calm. She knelt down, setting a single white lily at the base. "You taught me how to survive," she said softly. "Not in the way I wanted, but in the way I needed." Her voice didn't shake, it flowed steady like a truth finally finding air. The sky above was pale, brushed with soft gray clouds. Amanda looked up, her breath visible in the cool air. "I don't hate you anymore," she whispered, "because hating you kept me tied to you, and I'm done living in that chain." The wind stirred the petals of the lily, almost like a nod. Amanda smiled faintly. "You were broken, and you made me break too, but I rebuilt myself, stronger, softer, and that's how I know I won't become you." She stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, feeling lighter, not because she had forgiven her mother, but because she had forgiven herself for ever trying to earn her love. As she turned to leave, the sun peeked out for just a moment, scattering golden light across the stone. It wasn't redemption, it was peace. Quiet, simple, and finally hers. When Amanda returned home, the evening light poured through her front windows, turning everything gold. The walls, the books, even the air itself seemed to glow. Sierra was sitting on the couch, a warm smile already waiting for her. There was something different in her eyes, not the guilt or fear Amanda once recognized, but a quiet certainty. "You've been gone a while," Sierra said gently. Amanda nodded. "I needed to say goodbye." Sierra stood and handed her an envelope. "Then you're ready for this." Amanda frowned, opening it slowly. Inside was a legal document stamped and signed. The foundation she had started, the house I built, was expanding internationally. A donor had offered full funding. But at the bottom of the page, in neat handwriting, was Sierra's name, listed as co-director. Amanda looked up, startled. Sierra's smile softened. "You started it," she said, "but I want to help carry it, not because I owe you, but because I believe in it." For the first time, Amanda saw her sister. Not as a mirror of their mother's favoritism, but as a woman who had also chosen growth over grievance. The sisters stood there, in the quiet hum of the house Amanda once saved with $61K, the same house that had once symbolized debt, now reborn as a place of purpose. "You're sure?" Amanda asked. Sierra nodded. "Completely." Amanda exhaled, a laugh slipping through her tears. "Then maybe we both made it out after all." The two women embraced, not to fix the past, but to honor how far they'd come from it. The auditorium was full, hundreds of faces, each carrying their own private story, their own invisible battles. Amanda stood backstage, watching the crowd murmur, the air thick with anticipation. She wasn't nervous this time. She had spent years trembling before her parents, silencing her truth to be accepted. But now, she wasn't asking to be seen. She was choosing to be heard. When the announcer called her name, the applause was soft but genuine, a sound that felt like welcome instead of approval. She stepped into the light, every step deliberate, every breath steady. The microphone crackled slightly as she began. Once upon a time, I thought strength meant silence. That endurance was the same as love. But silence doesn't save you, it only teaches others how to forget you. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. The night my mother called me a failure, I believed her. Until I realized, failure isn't falling short of their expectations, it's abandoning your own truth to meet them. I paid $61,000 to keep a house standing, but I almost lost myself keeping a family from collapsing. Now I know, love doesn't demand sacrifice, it deserves respect, and forgiveness isn't about letting them back in. It's about setting yourself free to walk forward. The crowd was silent, some wiping tears, others nodding quietly. Amanda smiled through her own. If my story taught me anything, she said softly, it's that you don't need permission to begin again. Sometimes the apologue you'll never receive is the freedom you were meant to find. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not for a victim redeemed, but for a woman reborn. Years later, the world around Amanda had grown quieter, not from emptiness, but from peace. Her home, now tucked beside the same lake where she'd once burned her mother's letter, was surrounded by blooming lavender and wild grass. The air always smelled of rain and rebirth. Inside, photos lined the shelves, not of the family that had broken her, but of the one she had built, the women she'd helped, the lives her foundation had changed, the smiles that had replaced silence. Every frame was a reminder that she had turned inheritance into impact, pain into purpose. One afternoon, Amanda sat on her porch with a cup of tea, sunlight painting her skin gold. Sierra's laughter echoed in the distance, mingling with the voices of the women working at the nearby retreat center. The house I built, now standing proudly on land that once felt cursed. Amanda opened her old journal, its pages weathered but sacred. On the final page she wrote, "Forgiveness is not forgetting, it's remembering without bleeding." She closed it gently, setting it beside her. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of lavender through the air, and Amanda smiled, not because everything had turned out perfectly, but because she finally understood that healing wasn't a destination. It was a daily decision. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered the words that had once defined her entire journey. They called me a failure, but I was just unfinished. And with that, she leaned back, eyes closed, heart steady. The world didn't owe her peace anymore. She'd built it, brick by brick, truth by truth, and at last she was home.